snow leopard cub, rescued by man, but its angry mother did the unthinkable. In the wild, survival often hinges on instinct and fate. When a man stumbles upon an injured snow leopard cub, he decides to intervene, unaware that his compassion will soon be tested.
I'll stay with you tonight.
As he tends to the cub's wounds, a mother's fury is unleashed and the real battle begins. Part 1, the tragic discovery. The mountains stretched out before him, a vast sea of snow and stone, as the old man hiked deeper into the wilderness. He had spent years in the rugged terrain of the Himalayas, but today something felt different. The air was colder than usual, the winds sharper, and there was an unease in the silence around him. It was a silence that seemed to hold its breath, as if the earth itself was waiting for something to happen. As the man climbed higher, the thick blanket of snow crunched under his boots. His breath formed clouds in the icy air, and his once strong legs, now a little weary from age, struggled to keep up with the demanding mountain pass. But he pressed on, driven by an unspoken call of the wild something that had always tugged at him since he was a boy. The mountains had a way of speaking to those who listened, and today they were calling to him louder than ever. It wasn't until he reached the edge of a cliff overlooking a frozen riverbed that he heard it faint, but unmistakable. A cry, a small, pained whimper. At first he thought it was the wind playing tricks on him, but then he heard it again. This time it was unmistakable. Without hesitation, the old man followed the sound, cutting through the dense thicket of trees. The ground beneath him was treacherous, the snow now mixed with patches of ice. But his steps were sure. He had lived in the mountains long enough to know that every sound, every movement in nature had its meaning. He wasn't sure what he was going to find, but he knew he had to find it. And then he saw her. Lying motionless in the snow, a small figure, her body a pale silhouette against the white. It was a snow leopard cub, no more than a few months old. Her fur was thick with the distinct rosettes marking her sides, but her tiny body was battered, her fur matted with blood and ice. She was breathing barely, but her strength was fading with each passing minute. The old man's heart dropped. He had seen many animals in his years, wild and injured, some near death, others already gone. But this was different. This was a creature of the wild, fierce and beautiful, and she had no one. No mother, no protection, just the biting cold and the mountain's silent witnesses to her pain. He knelt beside her, his breath catching in his throat as he looked at the small cub. Her eyes, though weak and clouded, locked onto his. There was fear in them, yes, but there was something else, something that pulled at the old man's heart. It was as if she was asking for help, a silent plea from a creature too young to survive on her own in such harsh conditions. Without thinking, the old man carefully scooped her up, cradling her against his chest. His hands, weathered and calloused, felt the warmth of her small body, a fragile life in his arms. She whimpered softly, pressing closer to him, her small body trembling.
Where is your mom?
He knew the risk. A snow leopard cub was no ordinary creature. They were wild, fierce, and capable of surviving on their own, but this one, this cub, was vulnerable. She had been abandoned alone in the cold, fighting for survival. And yet, as he held her, he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this brief encounter, was no accident. There was something more at play here, something that had brought them together in this vast, unforgiving wilderness. The old man's decision was made in that instant. He couldn't leave her to die alone. He would take her with him, care for her, and try to nurse her back to health. But as he turned to make his way back to the cabin, a shadow passed over him, a feeling of dread he couldn't explain. The snow leopard mother was out there somewhere, and she would stop at nothing to find her cub. The old man was about to learn that rescuing one life could come with consequences far greater than he could imagine. But little did he know, the real challenge had only just begun, and soon he would face the fury of the wild in a way he never expected. Part 2, Beneath the Same Sky. The wind howled across the high ridges as the old man made his way back to his cabin, and the small snow leopard cub swaddled inside his coat. She had stopped crying. Perhaps she was too weak, or perhaps she knew somehow that she was no longer alone. He held her close, careful not to jostle her injured side. Her breathing was shallow, but steady, her head resting against his chest, where his heart beat strong and calm. The journey home was slow and treacherous. Snow had begun to fall again, the sky turning a deep bruised gray as clouds thickened overhead. The man paused every so often, adjusting his coat to shield the cub from the biting wind.
Don't worry, little one. I'll stay with you
Though his
tonight.
joints ached and his lungs burned from the cold air, he never stopped. Not once did he consider leaving her behind. By the time he reached the cabin, a weather-worn structure nestled against the side of a cliff that the sky had turned nearly black. He kicked open the door, the hinges groaning with age, and stepped inside. The warmth of the fire, which had burned low in the hearth, welcomed them both. He knelt and gently placed the cub on a thick wool blanket near the fire, her small body shivering as the heat began to work its way back into her blood. The cabin was simple but sturdy, filled with the scent of pine-dried herbs and smoke. Along the walls hung maps, antlers, old photographs, and tools of a life spent surviving the wild. It was not built for comfort, but it had always been safe. The man moved quickly, placing more logs on the fire and boiling water over a small iron stove. He prepared a bowl with a mix of warm goat's milk and crushed fish, whispering to himself as he stirred. Just like for the pups, he muttered, remembering the dog he'd raised years ago. His voice was gravelly from years of cold air and silence, but it softened as he approached the cub again. At first, she refused to eat. Her eyes fluttered open, glassy and distant, and she turned her head weakly away. But the man did not push. He simply sat beside her, his large hands resting on his knees, his presence quiet and calm. Minutes passed. Then slowly, cautiously, the cub stretched her nose toward the bowl. She licked once, then again. A few minutes later, she had finished the whole thing. It was the beginning. For the next 3 days, the old man nursed the cub with quiet determination. He treated her wounds with herbal salves, changed her bedding often, and fed her small meals every few hours. She never purred, never whined, just watched him with those wide, amber eyes, half wild, half weary. And in return, he spoke to her in low tones about the mountain, about his younger days, about how once long ago a storm like this had nearly taken his life too. In those quiet hours, the bond between them began to form not through touch or commands, but through presence. A silent understanding that neither of them could quite explain. But outside, the mountain watched. And somewhere far beyond, to the ridges and trees beneath the same storm-dark sky, a pair of golden eyes scanned the snow. The snow leopard mother had returned to the den where she had left her cub during the hunt, only to find it empty, scattered with blood, disturbed by unfamiliar scent. Her snarl pierced the air. Her nose went to the ground. She sniffed once, twice, and then began to move her powerful limbs, pressing through the snowdrifts with single-minded purpose. The forest, once silent, now listened. She was coming. As the old man tended to the cub beside his fire, unaware of the golden eyes tracking his scent through the pines, nature prepared to test the price of compassion and whether one man's kindness could withstand a mother's wrath. Part 3, When the Wild Comes Knocking. The storm had passed by morning, leaving behind a hush so deep it felt like the world was holding its breath. Snow blanketed everything in sight. Smooth and untouched, the trees bowed under the weight of silence. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled low. The old man stirred a pot of bone broth on the stove, glancing now and then at the small figure curled near the hearth. The cub had slept deeply through the night, its breathing now even and its eyes brighter. She had eaten again at dawn clumsily, but with more strength, and after licking the last drop of milk from the bowl, she nestled her head against the blanket, letting out a tiny, tired sigh. The man watched her with a gaze that was no longer just curious, but protective. She was no longer just a snow leopard cub, she was something more. A presence, a reason. He sipped from a dented mug and leaned back in his chair, speaking aloud, as he had begun to do more frequently. "You're stronger now, little one. You'll make it," he said. "Maybe you'll even forget this old man someday." But outside the forest had not forgotten. Unseen by the man down the slope and hidden among the trees, a shape moved, slow, silent, deliberate. Her body low, her shoulders shifting fluidly with each step. The snow leopard mother had followed the trail all through the night, the broken scent of man and cub, the disturbed snow, the faint traces of fish oil and fire smoke. Her instincts were sharpened by desperation. Her child had been taken. Now she was close, closer than the man could imagine. The old man stepped outside with a small metal basin to gather snow for melting. As he bent down, the back of his neck prickled a sensation that years in the wilderness had taught him never to ignore. Slowly, cautiously, he stood upright, scanning the tree line. Nothing. No movement. No sound. Just white upon white. Still, he felt it something watching him. He turned back toward the cabin, snow crunching under his boots. He didn't see her. Not yet. Inside, the cub lifted her head. Her ears twitched. She let out a low, uncertain chirp. The old man noticed. "What is it, girl?" he asked, gently kneeling by her side. She stared at the door body, tense.
You little troublemaker.
That's when he heard it. A sound so soft it might have been mistaken for the wind. A low guttural growl. Controlled. Intimidating. Wild. The man rose quickly, heart thudding. He reached for the iron rod he kept near the door. Not a weapon, but something sturdy, something he hoped he wouldn't have to use. He opened the door, and there she was. At the edge of the clearing, barely visible against the trees, stood the full-grown snow leopard. Her chest rose and fell with slow, deliberate breaths. Her golden eyes blazed with intensity, locked onto the cub inside.
Your child is fine.
The old man froze. Every instinct screamed at him, back away.
Calm down.
Don't challenge her.
Your child is fine.
But something deeper told him to hold still. This was no ordinary animal. This was a mother. And the cub inside his cabin, her cub. He stepped out slowly, hands raised. "Easy now," he murmured. "I didn't mean to take her. She was alone. She was dying." The snow leopard growled again, her massive paws shifting slightly, sending powdery snow flying.
Your child is fine.
She didn't charge. She didn't flee. She simply stared and waited. From inside the cabin, the cub whimpered. And that was all it took. The mother sprang forward. The man didn't run. He stood firm, heart pounding, whispering, "Don't do this. You've come too far." But the leap he feared never came. The snow leopard stopped just yards from him. She crouched low, her growl softening into something else. A whine. A cry. The cub responded. Before the man could act, the cub had risen on shaky legs, padding to the doorway.
Calm down.
She looked at the man, then past him.
Fine.
And with surprising strength, she stepped outside, her body visibly trembling, not from cold, but from something deeper. Recognition. Mother and cub locked eyes. The moment held them all, man, cub, and mother, three hearts suspended in a moment, neither fully understood. The mother took a step forward. The cub with hesitant joy took one too. Another step, then another, until finally she reached her mother's side. The adult snow leopard sniffed her cub thoroughly, licked the blood-matted fur along her head, and then only then turned her gaze back to the old man. Not with fury, not with gratitude, with something in between, something ancient, something sacred. Then, without a sound, she turned and began to walk away, her cub following beside her, weak but alive. The old man watched them disappear into the trees, breathless, rooted to the snow. And as silence returned to the mountains, the old man stepped back into his cabin, forever changed by a moment that neither nature nor time would ever erase. But what if that wasn't the end of their story? What if the wild remembers kindness? Part 4, The Test of Compassion. The days after the snow leopard's departure passed slowly in the mountains. The air was still cold, but the winds were softer now, and the sharp edges of winter had begun to dull. Inside the cabin, the fire still burned, but the hearth felt emptier. The old man moved through his routines, feeding the fire, boiling tea, patching worn gloves. But something in his rhythm had changed. He found himself looking toward the trees more often, pausing at the door longer than usual, ears perked not for danger, but for memory. It had been a week since the cub and her mother vanished into the woods, but he still felt their presence like a warmth that lingered even after the fire had died. He sat in his chair by the window one evening, gazing at the dimming forest. "Guess you made it." He said aloud the words barely more than a whisper. "Guess I was just a stop on your way back home." But deep in his heart, he wondered, was that it would they ever return? Then one morning, as a light snow began to fall again, and the answer arrived not in a roar, but in silence. It began with tracks, fresh ones, not dog prints, not deer, paw prints, big, round, unmistakable paw prints pressed softly into the snow just outside his cabin. He knelt beside them, his breath catching in his throat. His fingers hovered above the trail, trembling not from cold, but from awe. He followed them to the back of the cabin, where they stopped near the firewood stack. There, resting atop the split logs, was something he hadn't expected, a single freshly killed rabbit. Neatly placed, untouched, a gift. He straightened slowly, scanning the tree line, but saw nothing. No movement, no flicker of fur. Just the quiet forest holding its breath again. And then, in the days that followed, it happened again. A pheasant left near the creek, a fish still fresh on his doorstep. Each time the same pattern, tracks in the snow, no sign of the leopard, but the unmistakable mark of her presence. It was as if she was watching over him now, repaying his kindness in the only way she knew how. A wild offering, a thank you. And though the old man never saw her directly, he began to sense her. In the rustling of branches at night, in the soft indentations in the snow beyond the firelight, in the moments when he thought he was alone, but felt just watched enough to know he wasn't. He started speaking to the forest more often now, not out of habit, but out of hope. "Tell her the cub's stronger now," he'd say into the woods. "Tell her I still think about them." Weeks turned to months. The snow melted, grass returned. Birds sang louder each morning. Then one night, just before spring had fully claimed the valley, the man was awakened by a sound outside, not loud, but rhythmic. Footsteps, padded, measured. He rose from bed, opened the cabin door. At the edge of the clearing, in the silver blue light of the moon, stood the snow leopard mother. Her coat was sleek and clean, her posture calm. And beside her, taller, now stronger, but still familiar, was the cub. The old man stepped outside slowly, breath frozen in his lungs. The mother stared at him for a long moment, and then, to his disbelief, lowered her head. Not in submission, not in fear, but in recognition. And the cub. The cub bounded forward. Not all the way, just a few playful steps before stopping, her tail flicking, golden eyes wide and curious. It was a moment beyond language. A reunion not needed, but offered. The old man laughed soft and cracked like thawed ice, and knelt down, resting a hand on the ground. "Well, now," he whispered, "look at you." The cub sniffed the air, let out a soft chuff, and then turned back toward her mother. And together they vanished into the trees once more. But this time, the man didn't feel loss. He felt peace. And so, in a world where man and wild rarely meet without fear, one old man and one snow leopard proved that sometimes the wild doesn't forget. It remembers love. Have you ever felt a connection with an animal you couldn't explain? Could it be that nature understands kindness more deeply than we think? Share your story below. Part 5. A Legacy in the Snow. Spring had officially returned to the highlands. The last of the snow retreated into the shaded crags, and the earth breathed anew buds, pushing through the frost-bitten ground, birds calling across the valley with their first hopeful songs. Life was beginning again. But in the old man's cabin, a different kind of awakening was unfolding. The old man now walked with a slower gait, the stiffness in his knees more persistent, the crackle in his joints louder. But his eyes were still sharp, especially when he looked toward the forest. He no longer searched with desperation. He waited with reverence. Something had shifted inside him since the encounter, something he couldn't explain, not even to himself. He had returned to solitude, yes, but it wasn't the same solitude. Each morning as he gathered firewood, he checked the edge of the trees, not expecting, but hoping. And more often than not, there was something left behind, claw marks on a tree trunk, a flattened patch of grass, a few paw prints softened by dew. Signs that the wild hadn't left him behind. And sometimes, only sometimes, he swore he saw golden eyes watching from between the trees. Not threatening, not afraid. Simply watching the way old friends might from across a crowded room. Inside the cabin, the man had carved something new. Above the hearth, between a weathered photograph of his younger self and a faded map of the ridge trails, hung a piece of cedar wood. Burned into its surface, carefully etched with trembling hands, were the shapes of two leopards, one large, one small, and a human figure with a walking stick standing side by side under a pine tree. No names, no words. Just the image, eternal and quiet, like the bond it represented. That spring he began telling the story to others. Not many visitors made it that far into the mountains, but those who did, hikers, young researchers, curious wanderers, often found themselves drawn to the old man's fire. And when they asked about the carving above the mantel, he would lean back in his chair, sip his tea, and say, "There was a time I thought I'd seen it all. Storms lost survival. But nothing ever shook me like that cub." And then he would begin, slowly, deliberately, describing the snow leopard cub he found bleeding and alone. The way he cared for her. The mother who came full of fury and fire, and how the wild taught him something no book ever had. Each time he told the story, the room would fall quiet. His voice, gravelly and patient, carried a kind of weight that couldn't be faked.
Where are you going, my friend?
People listened not just because it was a tale of danger and survival,
Don't you?
but because it was about something more. It was about kindness. The kind that doesn't expect anything in return. Sometimes when he reached the part where the mother snow leopard returns in the moonlight, young ones would tear up. Older listeners would nod slowly, as if something unspoken had been confirmed in their hearts. And the old man, though he never cried, would always pause just a little longer at that moment, feeling the silence press gently on his chest. And as he finished the story, firelight dancing in his eyes, he'd look around the room and say, "They say the wild is cold, but let me tell you, when it looks you in the eye and sees your heart, it can be warmer than anything you've ever known." Outside, the pines would sway, and the wind would carry the scent of fir and stone and pine sap. And maybe a pair of golden eyes would be watching from the ridge. What would you have done if you were the one who found that cub? Would you have walked away, or stayed knowing the wild might come for you? Let us know in the comments below, because sometimes the quietest stories carry the loudest truths.
Thank you for listening to the whole story. Tell me what you think by comment below.
Lonely firefighter stops for a box on the road. What was inside broke his heart before the story begins. Let me ask you something. Where are you hearing this from? From the back seat of a late-day ride where the sunset stretches across the windshield like a forgotten memory? Or is it in the quiet of night, when every sound outside has gone still, and your heart is still reaching for something deep enough to finally touch? Or maybe it's just a coincidence, just another meaningless scroll, just a fleeting moment, like thousands before. And yet, this silence is what brought you here. And if that's true, I hope you'll stay. Not for me. Not because this story is more special than the others, but because there are small, forgotten lives, once nameless, once unseen, who only needed someone to stop, to see them, to hear them, just once. Just like the way one man, lonely, exhausted, as if he had nothing left to hold on to, pulled over for nothing more than a weathered old box by the side of the road. And what he found inside didn't just make him cry. It awakened a part of him he thought had died long ago. So put on your headphones, turn up the volume, and listen. This story doesn't need you to believe. It only needs you to feel. The afternoon sun poured over Timberline Pass like a blade pulled from fire, searing both the silvered rock and the wild grass along the mountain's edge. At a sharp bend in the dusty road, hidden behind a scorched tangle of bushes, sat a warped wooden crate, crooked, silent, and easy to mistake for garbage. Just another forgotten thing on a forgotten stretch of earth. But if someone had stopped, if someone had dared to stand still and truly listen, they would have realized that the crate wasn't empty. Something inside was clinging to its final breath, not quite a cry, not strong enough to be a whimper, just a fractured rhythm of air, like a plea that had never formed into words. In that dim hollow lay a mother Doberman, so thin her skin stretched tight over her jutting bones, her fur matted in patches with dried blood, feces, and road dust. She was curled in on herself, not whining, not struggling, not even shivering. Her eyes were sunken, but still open, fixed on the burning red sky as if waiting for something that would never arrive. Beneath her, 7 tiny puppies, no larger than a human hand, lay curled against her belly, their breathing shallow, their translucent skin exposing pale blue veins. Some didn't move at all. Others barely exhaled, releasing ghost-like breaths into the heat. They pressed into their mother's failing warmth as if trying to hold on to a heartbeat already slipping away. No water, no food, no shelter. Only the merciless summer heat of the highlands, the terrifying stillness of isolation and death. slow, steady, claiming one small pulse after another within that box. But the most haunting thing wasn't the smell. It wasn't the sight of bodies wasting into silence. It was the mother's eyes. She didn't beg. She didn't blame me. She just watched, quietly, unflinchingly, as if she'd seen dozens of footsteps pass by without stopping, as if hope had already left her. But still, she waited. Waited for someone who wasn't like the rest. Someone who could hear life gasping and not turn away. That crate had been there for days. Dry mud clung to the bottom. A tire mark curved away in panic. Blood had dripped and dried black along the splintered wood. No one stopped. Not a soul. And if you had passed by it at that moment, what would you have done? Would you have stopped, stepped out, lifted the lid, and taken responsibility for lives on the verge of vanishing? Or would you have done what so many do? Walked past, found a reason to forget, and told yourself someone else would come later. That day, one man did stop. Worn boots dusted in red earth, a sun-bleached canvas shirt, gray stubble shadowing a face hardened by time. His shoulders were slightly hunched as if carrying something unspoken for far too long. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. He walked, one slow step at a time, as though each step brought him closer to a sorrow he no longer knew how to face. When he crouched beside the crate, the mother's eyes didn't change. No hope, no fear, only stillness, as if she had realized, if not this man, then there would be no one. And in that instant, time seemed to pause. A lifeless stare met a fire long extinguished. A dying heartbeat brushed against a conscience afraid to feel again. A question rose, not spoken, not answered, but one that would echo forever in the hearts of those who hear this story. If you were the last one to pass by, would you have stopped? That morning began like every other morning in the Timberline Range. A blanket of fog, thick as coarse linen, draped over the earth. Towering pine trees casting long shadows across the rugged dirt road that snaked southward, and bird song drifting through the leaves like fragments of memories lost in time. No car horns, no human voices. Just the wind whispering past a weathered wooden porch, stirring a rusted wind chime that hung beneath a roof browned by age. There, at the forest's edge, nearly 20 miles from town, stood a small cabin with a single window and a chimney that rarely smoked. No one remembered who built it, but the man who lived inside was named Nate Rourke, 52 years old, alone, no dog, no cat, no social media, no smartphone. His world had shrunk to a few things: a creaky wooden bed, a desk with a yellow lamp, a small bookshelf filled with second-hand volumes, and a metal lockbox hidden beneath the floorboards. One he hadn't opened since that autumn. Nate had once been a firefighter, a respected captain, a devoted husband, a man who walked into flames without hesitation. Until the day a house fire broke out in Salem. He was dispatched to rescue 3 children trapped upstairs. Nate went in first. His team followed. But the house's structure was weaker than expected. The floor collapsed. The ceiling fell. Nate dropped from the second floor and survived only because a crossbeam caught his chest. But the children didn't make it. And from that moment on, no one ever saw Nate respond to another rescue again. He left the department, moved to the mountains, and disappeared into a silence that even he didn't know how to name. Every morning, he brewed coffee in a blackened aluminum kettle, flipped a page in an old journal, and laced up heavy boots to walk into the woods. Not for exercise, not for clarity, just to keep existing. In the forest, nothing asked him to explain. Trees didn't question how he had failed. Birds didn't judge the scar that ran from shoulder to hip. And the wind, it simply moved past him, as if it still believed he was alive. This morning, like always, he followed the eastern trail. But something made him turn. a split in the path he rarely took. No clear reason, just a feeling, a vague instinct, the same kind that once pulled him out of the fire, out of rooms glowing red with heat and lined with death. And this time, it led him toward Timberline Pass, where silence was about to speak. Nate didn't think much of it then. Just the crunch of his boots against the earth, the steady breath of a man long used to solitude, and the drifting edges of memory that floated through his mind like lingering smoke. Olivia, his wife, with deep red hair, once sitting on the cabin steps, book in hand, bare feet in the morning mist. "If you're in pain, don't run from it," she once told him, eyes staring far off as if speaking about herself. "Pain is the most real thing we have left." Olivia passed away 2 years after the fire. Ovarian cancer. No complaints, no drama. She just disappeared, quietly, as if she knew he couldn't handle another loss that screamed. Since then, the cabin had gone quiet. Everything had. Even the harmonica Nate used to play after dinner fell silent. But that morning, as he rounded the third bend nearly 4 miles from his cabin, with the mountain stillness cutting so deep it numbed him, he heard something strange. Not birds, not wind, but something off. It was thin as a falling leaf, quiet as a breath swallowed whole, yet unmistakably there. He stopped, part curiosity, part reflex, honed from fire, because when something breaks the silence like that, don't ignore it. It's calling you. And that's when he saw the crate, twisted, filthy, and inside, something no one else had stopped to see, something ready to vanish unless one person, just one, chose not to turn away. Nate slowed as his eyes locked onto a strange shape amid the scorched grass by the roadside. An old wooden crate, nearly the size of a human torso, tilted sideways, one corner shattered, its edges stained with dried mud and darkened blood. Anyone else would have passed it by, mistaking it for junk. But Nate, guided by an instinct long dormant, felt his skin prickle. He stood still, head tilted, listening. Beneath the forest's quiet, there was a sound, like breath, but so faint it could only be felt in the bones, not heard with ears. He reached toward the small of his back, where a rusted folding knife still hung, and stepped toward the crate. A gust of wind carried a rancid stench, thick, sour, the smell of death fermenting. But it wasn't the smell that stopped him. It was the eyes, just barely visible through the crack in the crate's broken slat. Bloodshot, sunken, empty as a pit. It was the eye of a mother dog, a Doberman, flattened against the crate's floor, head limp, cheek pressed into the dirt, nose barely twitching. She didn't howl, didn't bark, didn't move. She just looked. The look of something that had gone beyond pain, past fear, and into absolute surrender. Not because she wanted to die, but because she no longer had reason to want to live. Under her body were 7 other lives, tangled like scorched cotton balls, piled in a heap. A few no longer moved. Others trembled faintly, their breath uneven, rib cages sunken like something inside was crushing them. One of them lifted its head, eyes sticky with spit and dust, and made a sound, not quite a whimper, not quite a cry, but something so delicate it shouldn't have existed. Nate lowered himself. His rough hand gripped the crate's edge. It felt like touching the heat of a fire that hadn't fully died. Something tightened in his chest. Not fear. Recognition. He'd seen this before. Not with dogs, but with children. And that time, he'd arrived too late. He unlatched the broken hinge and gently lifted the lid. The mother dog didn't react. She had no energy left for fear or defense. But her eyes never left him, as if she was measuring. Was this man worthy of the last bit of life she was holding on to for her pups? Nate exhaled, part air, part soul. He tore off his flannel jacket, laid it on the ground, and then slowly, delicately, began lifting each puppy into it. They were weightless, boneless. One twitched at his touch, another slid limp into his hands, tongue hanging out, body soft as a broken doll. Each time he lifted one, something inside him stretched to its limit. When he reached for the mother, his hands shook. Not from fear, but because something inside him had stirred, something he'd sealed off beneath the ashes in Salem. He lifted her gently, her frame bent and brittle like charred wood, and laid her beside her pups. That's when, for the first time, Nate saw light in her eyes. Not much, not clear, but real. As if she was saying, not in sound, but with the final flicker of trust, "I'm giving them to you." Nate tied the corners of the jacket into a sling, cradled them all to his chest, and turned without hesitation. His foot slipped on the rocks, but he didn't stop. The wind stung his eyes, but he didn't blink. In his arms, 7 lives were still breathing, and this time he wasn't going to be too late. Not again, not ever again. Nate's pickup truck roared as if it too were straining against the silence inside its driver. Tires scraped across gravel, and dust billowed behind in a long streak. But Nate saw nothing except the flannel bundle holding 7 trembling lives against his chest. He set them gently on the passenger seat, laying an old oilcloth beneath, eyes flicking back and forth, watching every slight movement, listening to every shallow breath like a whisper fighting air. Sweat ran down his forehead and soaked the back of his shirt, but he didn't notice. One of the puppies let out a tiny squeak, like the final tick of a wind-up clock winding down to nothing. Nate clenched the steering wheel, jaw tightening until the tendons showed. No one knew what thoughts were passing through his mind at that moment, but if anyone could have heard it, they would have realized that each beat of his heart was a silent scream. "Don't die, don't die." The only vet clinic within 20 miles sat atop a small rise, its faded red roof sloping beneath a wooden sign barely legible. Green Hollow Veterinary Clinic. Nate slammed the brakes, the truck rocked slightly, and he leaped out, flung open the passenger door, and cradled the flannel bundle close as he sprinted across the lot. The glass door chimed softly as he pushed it open. No one at the front desk, no footsteps. But seconds later, a woman's voice called out from the back. "Hello? Give me just a..." She froze mid-sentence when she stepped out. She looked to be in her early 40s, with dark hair pinned up neatly, sharp eyes, and sleeves of her white coat rolled to the elbows. She didn't seem like someone who liked small talk. But when she saw the bundle in Nate's arms and heard the faintest whimper inside it, she didn't ask questions. "Room 3. Now." She led the way, the door already open, sweeping instruments off the steel table at the center. "Lay them here." Nate did as told, his hands still faintly trembling. "I'm Elise Moreno, the head vet here." She snapped on gloves. "And you?" "Nate," he said. "Rourke." Elise nodded. No further pleasantries. She peeled back the flannel. Her eyes narrowed, gaze moving swiftly across each emaciated body, every wound, every broken whine. "Severe dehydration, localized hypothermia, possibly some poisoning, environmental or insect-based. Where's the mother?" "Gone," Nate said quietly. Elise paused, only for a second. Then she turned and called sharply toward the hallway. "Talia!" A small figure appeared almost instantly. A young woman, no more than 22, with pale blonde hair pulled low, a hearing aid tucked behind her left ear. She didn't speak, just looked at Nate, then at the puppies, and gave a tiny nod. Elise motioned. "IV kits, gauze, neonatal oxygen tubes." Talia disappeared. No words, no questions. Nate stood silent at the edge of the table. He wasn't used to being the one watching while others took action. In another life, he had been the one giving orders, the one running into fire, the last one out with a life in his arms. But now, in front of him lay 7 fragile souls. None of them knew his name. None owed him anything. And somehow, he wanted to be tethered to every breath they took more than anything else in the world. Elise examined each one, her hands efficient, firm, but never cruel. "You're not their owner." "No." "Then why?" Nate swallowed hard, met her eyes. "Because no one else did." Elise said nothing, but something in her gaze softened, just slightly. A blink, that's all. But enough to show that his answer had reached somewhere deep inside her. Talia returned with a kit, swiftly attaching IV lines. One of the puppies began convulsing. Elise pressed her hand gently against its belly, fingers adjusting with surgical care. "They've still got a shot, but we'll need to monitor them closely. At least 2 are losing liver rhythm. The rest might recover." She looked at Nate. "What are you planning to do now?" He didn't answer right away. He looked down at the 7 lives stretched before him, then said, voice low and steady, "I'm staying." Elise tilted her head. "You don't have to. We can handle it." Nate met her eyes. "I'm not staying because I have to. I'm staying because I've left enough behind." For a moment, time held its breath. Elise nodded, then turned away, voice hoarse. "Then starting tonight, you're on watch. First shift's yours, firefighter." And for the first time in years, Nate no longer felt like a ghost walking through ash. He was part of something living. And this time, he wasn't going to let it slip away. Night fell fast over Timberline Hill, like a heavy blanket draped over everything still breathing. Inside the recovery room at Green Hollow, the soft amber light reflected off the frosted glass, casting the blurred outline of a man who no longer looked like himself. Nate sat in an old plastic chair, back curved, hands resting on his thighs, eyes fixed on the heat-regulated incubator in the center of the room. Inside lay the smallest of the puppies. It had no name. Never had. But for Nate, from the moment he first touched that trembling body in the crate by the roadside, it had become something strangely familiar, like a piece of his own soul, long lost, whispering its way home. The other 6 puppies had stabilized. A few were starting to move, sneeze, and let out tiny whimpers, kicking weakly against the thin blanket beneath them. But this one didn't. It stayed still. No cries, no twitches. Just breathe. Slow, fragile. Each inhale was like a door creaking open, then slowly closing, unsure if it would ever open again. Elise checked in at 9 p.m. She placed a hand gently on its back and murmured something in Spanish, soft and intimate, like a lullaby from a mother who had once lost a child. Then she turned to Nate. "It's very weak. If there's no change by morning, we may have to let it go peacefully." Nate nodded, saying nothing, but his fingers gripped the edge of the chair until they turned white. She understood, and she left the room to a man and a life poised at the edge. What followed was no longer measured in hours or minutes. It was measured in interrupted breaths, in the moments Nate laid his hand against the glass, listening, in the countless times he thought the heartbeat had finally stopped for good. He didn't pray. He didn't whisper please. He simply sat there, eyes open, breathing in time with the tiny creature, as if so long as one remained, the other would not be taken. Around midnight, fatigue set in. Nate slumped forward, head resting against the edge of the incubator, one hand still lightly touching the glass. He didn't sleep, just floated inside the silence where old sounds came back. Olivia, sitting in their tiny kitchen, watering the rosemary on the windowsill, singing as she shook her head at him. "If you give up just before the miracle arrives, you'll never forgive yourself." He hadn't believed her then. But now, in this room, those words rang like the only truth he had left. 3 a.m. A sound, faint as a falling leaf. Nate's eyes opened. Nothing seemed different. Then another sound, this time clearer, like a quiet cough. He shot up and looked into the incubator. The puppy curled a paw inward, its chest lifted in a deeper breath, then another. Its eyes remained closed, but its nose twitched faintly. A tiny sneeze broke the silence, soft but real, a whisper of defiance against death. Nate's hands dropped to his sides. He stepped back, head bowed, shoulders trembling, not from cold, but because, for the first time in years, something inside his chest, something once burned and buried, had cracked open, glowing. He didn't cry. He didn't need to. He simply sat back down, folded one hand over the other, and whispered into the darkness. "Good job, little one." On the other side of the glass, the puppy lay curled tight, its breath evening out. The sun hadn't risen yet, but something had. The next morning, as the first light of day spilled through the dusty window slats of Green Hollow, the fragile lives inside the crates began to stir. Tiny tails flicked. A few small tongues reached out to lick the damp edges of the cloth, and the smallest puppy, the one that almost didn't make it, shifted just enough to press itself against the rough hand resting beside it. Nate hadn't moved since the night before. The coffee on the table had long gone cold. His neck was stiff from falling asleep upright, but he didn't care. These lives were still breathing, and something inside him was slowly beginning to thaw. Elise stepped in at 7 a.m., clipboard in hand. She gave Nate a small nod, her eyes sweeping discreetly across what now looked unmistakably like his 7 new children. Then she placed the board down, flipped through her notes, and spoke, quietly, as if still unsure whether she was ready to say the words aloud. "I found something strange." She held up a film slide, the light shining through to reveal an image beneath the skin of one of the pups, a faint scar surrounded by damaged tissue. Elise pointed. "Here, microchip location, but there are signs it was cut out, then sealed back up temporarily." Nate frowned. "You're saying someone tried to remove the chip?" Elise nodded. "Not just remove, erase the trace, so it couldn't be tracked." Nate looked at the puppies. Each one of them now held a different kind of question. Where did you come from? And who tried to erase you? At that moment, Talia appeared with her usual quiet presence, carrying a battered laptop into the back room. She didn't say much, just sat in front of the screen, eyes focused, hands typing in the remaining digits from the damaged chip Elise had extracted. "This can be traced back," she wrote on a scrap of paper and slid it in front of Nate. "If we're lucky, we'll find original records from the chip manufacturer's database." Nate nodded, unsure of what to say. He had never expected to find himself part of an investigation, but this time, he knew, saving lives wasn't enough. Justice had to be saved, too. Nearly 2 hours later, Talia looked up, her eyes red, her hands trembling slightly. She pointed to the screen. "Got it." The information glowed back. A breeding facility named K9 Apex registered in Grant County, Oregon. Address: inactive. Phone number: disconnected. However, the data showed that within just 14 months, the facility had registered over 80 Doberman puppies, all female. Elise's brow tightened. "That's not a normal breeder." Nate's voice was low. "It's a production line." The three of them looked at each other. No more words were needed. They knew what they were facing, an organized, intentional system built on the suffering of animals, with layers of protection behind it. Nate pulled out his phone, for the first time in months, and scrolled to a familiar contact. Sarah Gentry, former state prosecutor turned animal protection advocate. "I need you to see this," he said. The line was silent for a beat. Then a woman's voice answered, slow but firm. "I'll be there by afternoon." That same day, Sarah Gentry arrived at the clinic in a pale gray linen suit, silver hair tied back, her eyes sharp with the weight of having seen more than the world ought to allow. She reviewed the photos, the chip data, the maps, and the written statements from Nate and Elise. After an hour of review, she closed the file and nodded. "I have enough grounds to request a search warrant, but I'll need one more thing. Real imagery." Nate looked at Elise. "I'll go." Elise tensed. "You're not an investigator." "But I know these woods," he said. "I've walked every trail around Timberline. I've gone into places where others back away." Talia raised a handwritten note. "I'll go too. I was there once." The writing shook. Elise turned to her, stunned. "You?" Talia nodded slowly. A wound opened, not through words, but through a gaze so deep Elise didn't ask anything else. And so they went. A man with a scar on his chest. A girl who didn't speak but heard pain clearly. And a truth that needed to be pulled from the dark. The trial began 4 weeks later. Inside a small district courtroom where the wooden benches still bore traces of old paint and the fluorescent lights clicked softly overhead, Nate Rourke sat upright, hands gripping his written statement, eyes forward, not with fear, not with anger, but with absolute clarity. Beside him, Sarah Gentry pointed to a photo of the shattered wooden crate nestled among the bushes at Timberline. "Your Honor," she said, her voice honed to the sharpness of a blade held back just enough. "A living creature doesn't crawl into a crate, climb a mountain, and die quietly beneath the summer sun, by accident. Someone brought them there. Someone chose silence instead of action. And someone must be held accountable." The evidence was laid bare. Photos of the shattered wooden crate, the microchip scar. The iron cages are hidden deep in the woods. The tire tracks that matched. Talia's sworn testimony. Piece by piece, it formed a picture no one could deny. And when the sentence was read, 5 years without parole, a lifetime ban on animal ownership, the room fell into silence, as if the dogs themselves had finally been given a voice they were never allowed to make. But what made Nate's heart tremble wasn't the verdict. It was the look in Talia's eyes as she glanced at him from the back row. Eyes that once held only silence and fear were now lit with something he thought he no longer deserved. Trust. 3 months later, on the southern slope of Timberline, on a piece of land once barren but now fenced in and clean, the Red Ridge Rescue Center officially opened. No ribbon cutting, no ceremony, just 12 kennels lined with recycled wool blankets and a hand-carved wooden sign out front. Where the forgotten are named again. And just beneath the inscription, 7 tiny paw prints carved by hand, symbols of the 7 puppies who survived, now living proof of rebirth. Elise stayed on as medical director. She wore her white coat with the sleeves rolled up and hair pulled back, and her smile came more often now, not forced, but real. Talia returned to veterinary school on a scholarship from an anonymous sponsor but still visited every weekend, spending time with each animal like calling back pieces of a memory that had stayed quiet too long. As for Nate, he woke before dawn each morning, brewed coffee in the old black kettle, unlocked the gates before anyone else, and sat beneath the trees while the dogs played, sunlight glinting off his silver hair. One of the 7, the smallest, the one who had nearly slipped away, was now full-grown, sleek black coat with hints of red, the fastest and brightest of the pack. Nate had named her Ember, the last flame still burning. Each evening he sat on the porch steps, Ember's head resting on his knee, and read again the letter from a boy he had never met, named Liam, the child who once wrote, "I think you're a hero because you stayed when no one else did." The letter, now laminated, sat on the coffee table in the rebuilt cabin behind the rescue center. There, among the barking dogs, the scent of dry grass, and the soft music playing from an old radio, Nate had found something not everyone is lucky enough to recover: peace without regret. And when someone asked him why he did all this, from saving a fragile life to standing in court to building a place for healing, he simply smiled, eyes distant but light. "I didn't do it because I was strong. I did it because I once walked away, and this time I chose to stay." The story doesn't end in glory or awards. It ends with a warm blanket, a wagging tail, and a man sitting quietly beneath a tree at sunset, holding the creature he once pulled back from death. And somewhere, in the heart of the listener, one final line still lingers. Sometimes, the bravest thing isn't saving someone. It's staying long enough to witness them save themselves. Thank you for listening until the very last moment of this story. You may not be a firefighter. You may not live in the mountains. You may never have held a dying creature in your arms. But if your heart tightened when you heard that faint, desperate breath, if you've ever thought about stopping, kneeling down, and doing what others usually pass by, then you, in your own quiet way, are also a hero in this world. Amid all the noise, in a world that moves too fast, it's often the smallest things, like the eyes of a tiny puppy, that remind us of something far greater: compassion. If today's story moved you, please consider leaving a like, a comment, or simply subscribing to the channel, not just to support us, but so that together we can make sure stories like this are never forgotten. We promise to keep bringing you true stories, emotional, meaningful, about the small souls once abandoned. But never without hope. We'll see you in the next story.